Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I apologize for the last failure. I'm not sure what was going on with the technology on that one. That wasn't me on this one. I'm not going to take this one on me, then take this one on the technology itself. Nevertheless, that's why, it was the first start of a show. I'll keep the other part. It's funny. It's an embarrassment, but it's one of those things of it is what it is. You can move on. Just as a heads up, again, for people who don't necessarily see the last one, thank everyone for the support of the show. You guys have been a great help. Tomorrow is going to be a birthday bash. Tomorrow's my birthday, 41 years old. So tomorrow is also Patron Appreciation Day. So definitely put in the ideas that you want to talk about for the show. Put those under the previous video on the Patron page. And the choice will be made on what we talk about. Now, on that day, there are going to be multiple segments because that show is going to go for like an hour or two. But it's going to be Patron Appreciation Day and a birthday bash. I'm just combining them. Why not? It's my birthday. I can do what I want to. So there's that. The first part of that is also I am going to have a t-shirt drawing each month. But the Patron bash is going to be each week. Meaning going forward, at least once a week, we're going to have a video that's going to be saved directly and completely for the patrons. I made the point in the previous video that this is somewhat of a problem because there are people who also contribute on PayPal, and it's unfair that the PayPalians don't have access to the videos when they're also assisting the content. It's like you guys pay for this, all of you should have access. So the thought is to essentially have my own site, kind of like realnews.com, even though I'm not a news person, but to have my own site that allow all of the people who contribute to get access to the content to which I'm allowing specific access or specialized access. All right, so there's that. And for the last heads up, the link at the top, Streamlabs, that link is atrocious. I know that link is atrocious. Tomorrow, I'm out of solitary confinement and I can reapply for the PayPals. I'm not PayPal. I can reapply. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. It's like I had a brain lock. I can reapply for the PayPal for the YouTube partnership program. There's P's in it, which is why I keep thinking PayPal. The YouTube partnership program. So I will probably be able to take that atrocious link off. Streamlabs allows you to give as opposed to using Super Chat. The link is at the bottom in the description box. That's not a push. It's just a heads up. All right, so there's that. Let's get to the story. This story is going to be relatively fast, actually. I've said before in one of my other videos that sometimes it's the lies that people tell that get across interesting truths. Like, why are you lying about that? It's sometimes more interesting than what they say in the lie. I would imagine that if somebody lived in the Soviet Union, they would be so used to the stuff that their government says, meaning lies. And at some point, there would have to be a break where this is so out of line with reality that the facade starts to show and the facade starts to fall loose. I think that's kind of where we are. I think that's kind of where we are because of the internet, because of the amount of information that's out there. And fact is, it becomes much harder to lie when your life is detailed online. Any random person can look up the events of things that you've said, places that you've gone, and things that you've done to get across. Hey, what they're saying about this person doesn't necessarily hold true with the cornucopia of information that I have detailing who this person actually was. And what you're saying about from the standpoint of the lie gets across the facade. It gets across the problem. Why do you have to lie about this person in this way? Why? Enter one John McCain. Now, the media has been gone through talking about how awesome this guy was, how much of a freedom fighter this guy was. And if you go across the world, that all of these people also, for whatever reason, think the same thing. This sounds a lot to me like the kids in North Korea saying that all of the people around the world speaks North Korean because North Korean is the best language for everybody to speak. In the same way that seems utterly absurd, I find it to be utterly absurd that people who John McCain wanted to bomb and kill would somehow think that this guy is a freedom fighter. It's nonsense. And yet, it's what they've been saying. Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Human Rights Foundation even comes out and says something like that. Do you know, if I'm not mistaken, they named the Senate for a moment John McCain. They named one of the buildings after John McCain. This is nonsense. I don't want to speak ill of the dead. My mom has driven that in me, so I'll accept that. Not necessarily for the person, but more so for the family. But there's a problem from the standpoint of your society and the people growing up in your society to give positive affirmations to people who didn't live positive lives. From the time John McCain dragged himself out of Vietnam after being broken and tortured in Vietnam, John McCain was advocating the murder of a bunch of people by Nixon in Cambodia in these illegal bombings. From the time he was pulled out of that torture cell in Vietnam to the time John McCain dropped dead, John McCain has advocated the bombing and the killing of other human beings. Now, I'm supposed to look at that as a rational human being and says, yes, that person is a fighter of freedom. And he wanted to fight for freedom in one country after the next by bombing and killing those people, liberating them from their lives. Nevertheless, the propaganda goes on. Look at this. Look at this picture behind me. This is the Washington Post. There's something wrong with this picture. There's a reality that's peeking through in this picture. A reality that I've been talking about in my last videos about John McCain being a warmonger, that a bunch of people on the left has been talking about with John McCain being a warmonger, that the mainstream media, the facade that they use to cover American imperialism, is withering and breaking away. Reality peeking through. Human rights community lost the champion. And there's John McCain. For the moment, though, look at the guy who's standing beside John McCain. Look at the guy who's standing beside John McCain. Let's see if I can do a better picture. I recognize this guy. I didn't recognize him by face, I recognized him by name. And the moment I saw the name, I was like, oh wow, I know who that guy is because I've done a story on that guy. The guy's a Nazi. John McCain is standing on stage with a Nazi. Right there. There he is. He's in a suit. That's amazing. His name, just so we're clear and everybody can see him, right here. Tayakanabak. Now, I saw him from stories like this when I was covering the issue in the Ukraine, the rise of the ultranationalists. The catch is, just to give you a heads up, there was a break in the Ukraine, a civil war. There was an aspect of the Ukraine that wanted to go along more so with Russia, and there was another aspect that wanted to go more towards the West. The elected government of this was the Russian government. Now, you can understand that from the standpoint of Russia, let's go for international politics for the moment. From the standpoint of Russia, you have NATO, which is an organization that is a nationalized treaty organization set for the destruction of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union went bust, and this organization, a zombie at this point, a soldier without a mission, lurches forward looking for one conflict after the next to get itself embroiled in. Now, that said, though, the thing that goes on after the Soviet Union, Russia, still exists. And the United States and Western powers has essentially attributed, let's say, Soviet-esque things to the Russian government. Fair enough. Now, Russia is not within the sphere of domain from the standpoint of the Western powers, and these things are still considered to be antagonistic towards one another. You can understand that all of these NATO nations have aligned itself around the Russian border after it was said that NATO was not supposed to expand. Promises were given to Russia that NATO was not going to expand at the moment where the Soviet Union went bust, and those promises were broken. NATO expanded. Not just expanded, it expanded to the border of Russia itself. Ukraine is now one of those countries that are on the border. Imagine for the moment if that country also went to the west. You'd have had a bunch of nations, including, especially if Ukraine went into NATO, with an ideological adversity towards Russia being on the border of Russia. you can understand that that would be somewhat problematic. Ukraine was caught into this kind of fight between Russia and the West. Ukraine has always, to some degree, been in a fight between Russia and the West. There are fascinating lectures on this very specific topic, and this is going way into the weeds, talking about this very specific topic, so I apologize if this is going into the weeds. All I'm saying is Ukraine has always been in this intermediary ground, but again, that's besides the point. Some of the ultra-right, the Western governments in this case, that tried to set up this kind of secondary government in that country that was pro-West, were using Nazis to do this, to bolster the military in order to push back against what they considered, you know, for Russians assisting the Ukrainian government in pushing back Western aggression and stuff. They were using Nazis to do this. John McCain, the war hawk that he is, screaming that Vladimir Putin is somehow taking over the Ukraine, forget the fact that it was a Russian government, meaning that it was an elected government, and forget the fact that it's the West that was trying to entice or pushing Ukraine, putting up the specter that they can somehow join NATO, knowing that this would be a massive and clear provocation. Whatever. However this started and everything else, Nazis were assisting in pro-West government and pro-West military. This cat that's standing on stage with John McCain was one of the power brokers in this. Now, and let's go to the BBC. I just want to make this clear. John McCain, in an article where they're waxing and waning, poetically was the way that people described it, about how John McCain was a fighter for freedom and a fighter for liberty, and the human rights community lost his champion, and that all these people around the world are going to miss John McCain as he advocates for freedom. The man that advocated for bombing like 10 or 15 different countries, the world is, for whatever reason, is going to miss that warmonger. And in an article where they're talking about this poetic way in which John McCain is somehow this advocate for freedom and human rights, he's standing on stage with a goddamn Nazi. Standing on stage with a Nazi. Good job, Washington Post. I know the guy who John McCain is on stage with. Party leader Ole Tenebach repeatedly assured voters that the Svoboda is not racist. The reason why they think the Svoboda is racist, the party that this guy comes out of, is because it came out of a racist party. This was a Nazi party. They rebranded themselves into something that was a little bit more passable from the standpoint of the public. But the origins of this guy comes out of a Nazi party. I guess she didn't put that in her article. Maybe she didn't even know that. Maybe she didn't even care about that. But if you're advocating for the destruction of other countries so people who you care about get involved, just know that you are advocating for the bombing and killing of those people. Do you believe that the bombs are sensitive enough to say that this person is a child, or this person is a woman, or this person has nothing to do with the conflict, so I am going to divert my explosion to hit this guy across the street? It doesn't do that. When you drop bombs, those bombs land on everyone. The advocation for the bombing of these places is effectively the advocating for the killing of a lot of people. 90% of the bombs that we dropped in many of these places hit civilians. When they do studies, some of these studies show that 90% of the bombs that were dropped hit civilians. They didn't even know who those people were. If you're going to say that John McCain was this advocate for freedom, just understand that what you're talking about is an imprecise, indiscriminate murdering of human beings, and you're calling that freedom. That's Orwellian. It's utterly, entirely Orwellian. Let's go to FAIR. I love this website. Because they go through other things. It's not just Tannenbach. It's other people who John McCain worked with. Tannenbach is far from a minor player in Ukraine, and since the United States-backed coup, he has become increasingly influential. Tannenbach has been the leader of the fascist, ultra-nationalist Ukrainian political party Svoboda since its founding in 2004. Svoboda has its origins in explicitly neo-Nazi social nationalist party of the Ukraine, which proclaimed we are the last hope of the white race, humankind as such. He explains to people in the BBC that he's not racist at all. But while the party's radical past can be papered over, it cannot be erased. Its name, until 2004, was the Socialist National Party, and maintains informal links to another group, the Patriots of the Ukraine, regarded by some as pro-fascist. In 2004, Tyahnybok was kicked out of former President Viktor Yushchenko's parliamentary faction for a speech calling for the Ukraine to fight against a Muscovite Jewish mafia, using 2 insulting words to describe Russians and Jews, and emphasizing that the Ukraine had in the past fought this threat with arms. In 2005, he signed an open letter to the Ukrainian leaders, including President Yushchenko, calling for the government to halt criminal activities of the organized Jewry, which the letter was spreading its influence in the country through conspiratorial organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League, and ultimately wanted to commit genocide against the Ukrainian people. Tyahnybok stresses that he has never been convicted of anti-Semitism or racial hatred, though prosecutions opened a case against him after his 2004 speech. All I said then, I can also repeat now, he says. Moreover, the speech is relevant even today. The catch of it is, they've been using these type of militaries in order to push back the Russian military. Meaning this guy has essentially been a power broker in the Ukraine, and this guy is extraordinarily, virulently racist. Governments assist other governments or other people in those governments to push back against what they don't like in those governments. Let's be very clear that John McCain was essentially on stage with a Nazi because John McCain wanted that Nazi to push back against people who wanted to be in a pro-Russian government. Whatever you want to say about John McCain, fair enough. But the idea that you're going to whitewash away that the guy was a warmonger is nonsense. And fact is, this picture is reality seeping through the facade that they're trying to make of who John McCain was. John McCain is on stand with a Nazi pushing back, killing people in the Ukraine and pushing for those wars in the Ukraine. It is for the Ukrainian people to decide what the Ukraine wants, what Ukraine wants to do. John McCain on stage with a neo-Nazi is beautiful. It's beautiful. And it's telling. And I argue that this is reality seeping through the facade that these guys are trying to make. Human rights community lost the champion. Not so much. Not so much. Alright guys. I'll end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon. I have other shows that I want to do, and I just didn't want to keep this one all that long, but I will see you guys in like 10 minutes, however long it takes just to set up for the next show. All right, guys.